Beyond the shimmering opulence and rigid etiquette of Versailles lay a festering underworld where piety was a pretense and moral boundaries dissolved faster than champagne bubbles. Imagine a court so consumed by forbidden desires that its most hallowed chambers frequently served as stages for unspeakable acts, meticulously orchestrated by the very individuals sworn to uphold France's honor. These weren't fleeting indiscretions. They were institutionalized orgies, powered by absolute privilege and a hunger for excess that mirrored the realm's decline. If the unraveling of gilded ages and the shadows beneath grand facades stir something in you, then let your presence be known. Subscribe for more deep dives into history's forgotten corners. Drop a comment with your thoughts and share where in the world these whispers have reached you. The Palace of Versailles, a monument to absolute monarchy, rose from the marshlands of France as an act of unparalleled ambition. Louis XIV, the Sun King, had envisioned it as a gilded cage for his fractious nobility, a place where their energies could be diverted from political intrigue to the ceaseless pursuit of status and royal favor. He compelled them to abandon their regional strongholds, severing roots of independent power. This colossal palace became the epicenter of a deliberate social experiment, amplifying human flaws into a grotesque art form. What he inadvertently created, however, was a crucible for depravity, where the forced proximity of thousands of aristocrats, coupled with immense wealth and idleness, fermented into a unique brand of moral decay. The daily life at Versailles was a bizarre spectacle of public living. From the king's waking ceremony, the lever du roi, where dozens of courtiers vied for the privilege of handing him his shirt, to his bedtime ritual, every act was performed before a chosen audience. This relentless lack of genuine privacy, ironically, did not breed modesty. Instead, it eroded the very concept of personal boundaries. When every aspect of existence became a performance, the line between public persona and private indulgence blurred, leading to a profound disassociation from traditional morality. The constant scrutiny paradoxically fostered a brazen disregard for decency. The sheer boredom of court life was a potent catalyst. Trapped in a rigid cycle of ceremonies, hunts, and formal dinners, the nobles, far from their estates and true responsibilities, found their traditional roles as local lords or military commanders rendered obsolete. This purposeful idleness fueled a desperate quest for new sensations, for thrills that transcended the prescribed routine. It pushed them toward increasingly audacious and illicit behaviors, from high-stakes gambling to whispered assignations in the palace's hidden passages. The pursuit of pleasure became a desperate end in itself, a game played within golden walls that both sheltered and imprisoned. Furthermore, the structure of power at Versailles meant that everything revolved around the monarch. Royal favor was the ultimate currency, and gaining it often meant shedding traditional inhibitions, embracing a courtly licentiousness as a badge of insider status. Those who wished to advance, to secure pensions, titles, or advantageous marriages, learned quickly that loyalty could be demonstrated not just through political maneuvering, but through unwavering participation in the court's prevailing culture, no matter how debauched. The king's tastes, explicit or implicit, became the guiding star for an entire society, making complicity in impropriety a de facto requirement for success. This environment systematically eroded the traditional virtues of the French aristocracy. Honor, once tied to martial prowess or virtuous conduct, became a mutable concept, often sacrificed on the altar of immediate gratification or political expediency. A duel might be fought over a slight, but widespread sexual promiscuity was an open secret. The family unit, already strained by arranged marriages for alliance rather than affection, found its bonds further weakened by the rampant infidelity and open pursuit of sexual conquests that characterized courtly life. Children, raised by governesses and tutors in distant wings, grew up witnessing a ceaseless pageant of impropriety, internalizing the lessons that pleasure and power were intrinsically linked, and that discretion, not morality, was the only true virtue. Versailles, therefore, was not merely a backdrop for illicit acts. It was a deliberately constructed system that nurtured and normalized them, transforming the most powerful elite of France into willing participants in their own moral dissolution. The grand balls and theatrical masquerades of Versailles, celebrated in art and literature, were often a carefully constructed illusion, masking darker intentions beneath glittering surfaces. These lavish gatherings, ostensibly for entertainment, frequently devolved into orchestrated debauchery. The anonymity of a mask or dimming chandeliers provided license for scandalous conduct. As champagne flowed and candles cast more shadows than light, decorum cracked, and whispered propositions often foreshadowed a deeper, more dangerous game. Masquerade balls, in particular, became notorious for their permissiveness, a deliberate suspension of rigid hierarchy. Attendees, clad in elaborate costumes concealing identities, from shepherdesses to satyrs, felt liberated from stringent court etiquette. Dukes flirted brazenly, ladies entertained multiple admirers, and scandalous liaisons were initiated with little immediate repercussion. The thrill of anonymity, the frisson of potential discovery, amplified forbidden encounters. Innocent flirtation often ended in whispered assignations in secluded alcoves, hidden chambers, or within the vast palace gardens. Reputations painstakingly built could be risked for a single night's illicit pleasure, consequences manifesting like a slow-acting poison days later. Beyond these public spectacles, however, lay a network of private parties and secret gatherings, far more explicit in their intent, operating in a distinct moral universe. Hosted in smaller, intimate apartments of influential courtiers, away from the main court's prying eyes, the pretense of social graces was shed entirely. An atmosphere of premeditated indulgence prevailed. Guest lists were carefully curated, admitting only those known for liberal morals and willingness to participate in uninhibited entertainment. These were meticulously planned opportunities for excess, designed to push conventional morality's boundaries and explore desire's furthest reaches. Invitations were coveted, a mark of true insider status, signaling a complete shedding of provincial virtue. Within these clandestine spaces, senses were deliberately overwhelmed. Raw, hypnotic music throbbed, a counterpoint to unrestrained conversations. Wine, from finest vintages to potent spirits, flowed freely, often laced with aphrodisiacs, dissolving inhibitions and sharpening carnal desires. The air, thick with perfume and heated bodies, set the stage for libertine pursuits. Conversations veered from political gossip to bawdy jokes, escalating into explicit propositions. Some parties featured elaborate theatrical performances blurring the lines between art and outright pornography, serving as provocative preludes. The atmosphere was one of calculated release, an escape from suffocating formalities where every desire was not just permitted but actively encouraged. The normalization of such events meant that refusal to participate, or even feigning enthusiastic engagement, was a profound slight, a challenge to the social order, and a direct threat to one's standing. Ambitious courtiers, seeking favor with powerful figures, or the king's mistresses, felt an undeniable compulsion to attend and engage in these revelries, often compromising personal ethics. The fear of ostracism, of being shut out from the inner circle where true power resided, was a powerful motivator, ensuring a steady stream of eager, or at least compliant, participants. To be seen as prim or overly virtuous was to invite ruin, declaring oneself outside the true currents of influence. Crucially, these gatherings were not merely social outlets. They were powerful instruments of political and social control. Secrets gleaned during drunken conversations, witnessed during compromising situations, or initiated through shared transgressions, became potent currency. These could be wielded as devastating political weapons, destroying reputations, shattering alliances, and determining families' fates. Loyalty was often forged in mutual complicity, binding individuals through the potent glue of shared sin. Participants in Versailles' darkest, hidden life found themselves enmeshed in a tangled web of dependencies and obligations, creating a shadowy network of power, rivaling official government structures. The contrast between outward piety and inward depravity was stark, a profound chasm defining Versailles' moral landscape. While the court attended Mass daily and upheld outward Catholic devotion, knights often saw them engaging in acts fundamentally contradicting these beliefs. This hypocrisy was not merely personal. It was systematically institutionalized, demonstrating a profound disconnect between appearance and reality. It was a testament to the court's collective self-deception and spiraling moral decay. The palace, a shimmering symbol of France's spiritual and temporal authority, had become a grand stage for a carefully choreographed collective act of sin, where the sacred and the profane danced a macabre pas de deux, obliterating the line between virtue and vice, leaving a gilded vacuum where only pleasure and power held sway. The system of royal mistresses and favorites at Versailles was far more than a matter of personal dalliance. It was a deeply ingrained political and social institution, a complex web of influence, ambition, and often brutal exploitation. This shadowy hierarchy, though unofficial, was as formidable and calculating as any ministry, often wielding more immediate power. Within this system, relationships were rarely about genuine affection. Instead, they were transactional, a dangerous game where political secrets, royal decrees, coveted appointments, and vast sums of wealth were exchanged for intimacy, unwavering loyalty, and unparalleled access to the monarch's ear. It was a parallel court, operating on different currencies and an entirely distinct moral code. Yet its decisions could shake the foundations of the realm. The official royal mistress, or maîtresse en titre, held a position of immense, albeit unofficial, power, her influence radiating through the entire court like a silent tremor. Figures like Madame de Montespan, who dominated Louis XIV's affections for years, or the intellectually formidable Madame de Pompadour, Louis XV's primary confidant, wielded influence that often surpassed that of ministers. They shaped foreign policies, secured lucrative military commissions for their protégés, promoted allies, and ruthlessly destroyed rivals with a whispered word or a casual slight to the king. Their opulent apartments became secondary courts, bustling with nobles, artists, and even foreign envoys, all vying for an audience, hoping to curry favor or glean privileged information. To gain their favor meant a direct, albeit unofficial, channel to the king, bypassing cumbersome official protocols. This reality transformed the pursuit of a royal mistress into a highly competitive and often brutal enterprise, not only for the women strategically vying for the position, but also for the ambitious courtiers and families desperately seeking to align themselves with her rising star. It was a zero-sum game played with reputations, fortunes, and futures as collateral. But the system extended far beyond the singular acknowledged maîtresse en titre. The king and many high-ranking nobles, ever seeking novelty and new avenues of influence, maintained a constant fluid rotation of less formal favorites, both male and female. These individuals, often younger, less established courtiers from families eager for advancement, found themselves thrust into positions of dazzling, yet utterly fleeting prominence. Their fortunes, social standing, and identities could be made or broken by the arbitrary whim of powerful patrons. For a select few, becoming a royal favorite was a dizzying, meteoric ascent from obscurity, offering titles, immense wealth, and social status beyond their wildest dreams. Yet for countless others, it proved a terrifying descent into a gilded servitude, where their bodies, affections, and private lives were simply commodities to be consumed, then discarded when interest waned. The whispers of court could elevate them one day and condemn them the next, leaving them emotionally scarred and socially isolated. The colossal power imbalance in these relationships inevitably led to widespread, systemic exploitation, a dark undercurrent beneath Versailles' glittering surface. Younger, less experienced nobles, or those from families lacking significant generational influence or wealth, were particularly vulnerable to this predatory dynamic. A beautiful young woman might be recommended to an aging duke, or a handsome young man presented to a royal prince by ambitious parents, hoping to secure a beneficial match, a critical court position, or protection from disgrace. Refusal for the chosen individual was often not an option, as it could mean instant financial ruin for their entire family, permanent social ostracization from the court's inner circles, or even, in more extreme cases, political imprisonment or disappearance. The concept of consent, as understood in a modern sense, was often a meaningless abstraction in a world where one's very existence was dictated by a rigid social hierarchy and the absolute power of the monarch and his favored few. To disobey was to defy fate, and the consequences were dire, often absolute. The king himself, particularly Louis XV, was known for his extensive and notoriously varied tastes, which grew more indiscriminate as his reign progressed. To satisfy these evolving appetites, he maintained a discreet yet infamous private residence known as the Parc aux Cerfs, located just outside the main palace grounds. This property was specifically reserved for his unofficial mistresses, often young women of humble origins, sometimes barely into their teens, systematically identified, recruited, groomed, educated in courtly graces, and then installed there for the king's exclusive pleasure. These arrangements, while hidden from the public eye and shrouded in layers of secrecy, were an open, whispered secret at court, a testament to the monarch's boundless power. While the women involved might gain a fleeting degree of protection, luxurious lodgings, and financial security for their families, these arrangements represented a systematic, almost industrial-scale, commodification of female sexuality for royal pleasure. The Parc aux Cerfs effectively functioned as a royal brothel, turning the king himself into a calculated pimp for his own insatiable and often perverse appetites. It was a gilded cage designed for absolute control and disposable gratification. Male favorites, too, played a significant, if less publicly acknowledged, role, particularly in certain reigns and among the most powerful dukes and princes of the blood. These relationships, often whispered about behind closed doors but rarely openly acknowledged due to social strictures, could be equally instrumental in the intricate dance of political maneuvering. A young nobleman, perhaps lacking inherited lands or influence, but with striking good looks, wit, and a calculated willingness to offer services, both intimate and compromising, could rise rapidly through the court's rigid ranks. Such a path offered swift access to power, coveted titles, and immense wealth that would otherwise be unattainable through conventional means. The psychological toll on these individuals, however, could be immense. Living a life of constant pretense, their personal integrity, their sense of self, was constantly compromised in the relentless, often humiliating pursuit of advancement. They existed in a liminal space, simultaneously elevated and debased, their value tied to the whims of their powerful, often fickle, patrons. The bedchamber, therefore, became an insidious extension of the council chamber, a parallel, more dangerous arena where political battles were fought, and won not with declarations or debates, but with caresses, secrets, and sexual currency. Intimate confessions during moments of vulnerability, carefully planted suggestions in whispered pillow talk, and shared transgressions that bound individuals in mutual complicity, all became powerful, devastating tools in the relentless struggle for influence. Trust was a perilous, often fatal illusion. Loyalty, a fragile commodity, was fleeting, shifting with the mercurial tides of royal fancy and the ever-present threat of replacement. In this morally corrosive environment, moral lines were not just blurred. They were erased entirely, annihilated by a ruthless calculus of personal gain, strategic advantage, and sheer survival. Every interaction, every flirtation, every intimacy was imbued with a deeper, more treacherous meaning, all unfolding under the absolute unblinking shadow of unchecked power, where virtue was a liability and vice, a potential path to fortune. The very air of Versailles, therefore, carried not just the scent of perfume, but the heavy, intoxicating aroma of ambition, betrayal, and unbridled desire. Ultimately, the moral climate of Versailles was a direct reflection of its monarchs. Their personal conduct, their expressed values, and their willingness to tolerate or even encourage certain behaviors set the tone for the entire court. The escalating depravity witnessed within the gilded cage was not a spontaneous uprising of vice, but a gradual decay sanctioned, implicitly or explicitly, by the very individuals at the apex of power. The unblinking eye of the king, meant to oversee and judge, instead became a tacit endorser, transforming private indiscretion into public precedent. Louis XIV, the Sun King, established the foundation. While often depicted as a man of order and grandeur, his own notorious affair with Madame de Montespan, a married woman who bore him several illegitimate children, set a powerful precedent. His public displays of favor for his mistresses, granting them luxurious apartments within the palace and immense influence over state affairs, signaled to the court that infidelity, when sanctioned by the king, was not merely acceptable, but a direct path to power and advancement. This royal seal of approval effectively decriminalized adultery among the nobility, transforming it from a sin into a social strategy. While he also maintained a strong facade of Catholic devotion, attending Mass daily and participating in elaborate religious ceremonies, the contradiction between his pious pronouncements and his personal life was glaring. This hypocrisy effectively taught the nobility that religious observance was a matter of form and outward show, not of genuine moral substance or ethical obligation, thereby loosening the very bedrock of traditional morality. It was under Louis XV, however, that the moral dissolution of Versailles accelerated dramatically, spiraling into an abyss of unchecked appetite. Unlike his predecessor, who, despite his faults, possessed a formidable work ethic and a profound sense of kingly duty, Louis XV was characterized by a deep melancholy, a growing boredom with the affairs of state, and an insatiable appetite for sensual pleasure. This ennui at the heart of the monarchy created a vacuum that was quickly filled by courtly amusements and personal gratification. His most famous mistress, Madame de Pompadour, was a woman of intelligence and culture, yet her position further legitimized the bedchamber as a primary arena of political influence, where ministerial careers could be made or broken not by competence, but by proximity to the royal sheets. But it was his later years, particularly with Madame du Barry and his infamous Parc aux Cerfs, that truly solidified the court's reputation for institutionalized licentiousness. The very existence of this royal brothel, catering to the monarch's increasingly explicit and often perverse desires, served as a stark, undeniable testament to the crown's embrace of boundless hedonism. The king's disinterest in governance, coupled with his increasingly explicit pursuit of pleasure, sent a clear message echoing through every gilded corridor. The crown not only condoned, but actively encouraged a culture of excess and moral laxity, where the pursuit of pleasure superseded all other duties. The court, ever eager to imitate its sovereign, plunged deeper into hedonism, seeking to mirror the king's perceived liberation from moral constraints. If the king himself found solace and distraction in a parade of young women and increasingly elaborate private amusements, why should his courtiers be any different? The boundaries of acceptable behavior, already stretched thin under Louis XIV's reign, now crumbled entirely, replaced by a ruthless pursuit of novelty and sensation. Secret societies dedicated to libertinism flourished within the palace's hidden alcoves and private apartments, their members engaging in illicit rituals and elaborate sexual escapades, fueled by the example from the very top. The atmosphere became one where shocking acts of debauchery were not merely tolerated, but often celebrated as expressions of wit, daring, or sophisticated rebellion against outdated moral codes. Virtue became a quaint anachronism, while vice was a currency. The aristocracy, once the moral backbone of France, had become its moral abyss, sinking ever deeper into its own self-made quagmire of indulgence. Even Queen Marie Antoinette, though often a victim of the court's immense pressures and the target of scandalous rumors manufactured by political rivals, inadvertently contributed to the image of royal excess through her own lavish spending, her penchant for elaborate fashion, and her private theatricals at the Petit Trianon. While her personal morality was likely far less depraved than contemporary pamphlets suggested, her perceived frivolity and detachment from the immense suffering of the common people fed the growing public resentment against a nobility seen as hopelessly decadent and out of touch. Her famous quip, though likely apocryphal, about letting them eat cake, whether spoken or merely attributed, encapsulated the devastating perception of a monarchy lost in its own opulent fantasy while the nation starved. By the eve of the French Revolution, the image of Versailles as a hotbed of vice and corruption was firmly entrenched in the public imagination, a grotesque symbol of aristocratic depravity. The profound disconnect between the starving populace, struggling to survive, and the nobility's unbridled indulgence in sexual and material excess became a potent, incendiary symbol of royal tyranny and social injustice. The orgy courts of Versailles, therefore, were not just a historical curiosity or a collection of scandalous anecdotes. They were a profound symptom of a regime rotting from within, a society so consumed by its own appetites and illusions that it failed utterly to see the storm gathering beyond its gilded gates. The moral decay, systematically fostered and implicitly sanctioned by the monarchs themselves, ultimately contributed to the revolutionary fervor that would, in a torrent of blood and fury, sweep away the very foundation of their power and usher in an era of unprecedented upheaval. As the 18th century waned, the once unassailable grandeur of Versailles began to show its cracks, both literally in the aging stonework and metaphorically in the crumbling moral authority of the monarchy. The opulence that had once been a symbol of France's power now appeared hollow, a gilded facade barely concealing the rot beneath. Lavish excess, constant pursuit of pleasure, and systematic indulgence of illicit desires had not only bankrupted the state, but profoundly corroded the very fabric of French society, unraveling centuries of traditional values. The orgy courts of Versailles, once a clandestine playground for the elite, became a potent, undeniable symbol of a regime utterly out of touch, out of funds, and ultimately, fatally out of time. The glittering decadence, far from inspiring awe, now provoked disgust, a festering wound in the nation's heart. The intellectual currents of the Enlightenment, promoting reason, liberty, and the rights of man, clashed violently with the unabashed hedonism and absolute privilege displayed at Versailles. This new philosophy, championing human dignity and public welfare, found the court's relentless pursuit of self-gratification a direct affront. Philosophers like Rousseau and Voltaire, their words amplified by a burgeoning print culture, fiercely critiqued the aristocracy's idleness, its fiscal irresponsibility, and its fundamental moral failings. Their arguments, often veiled but easily deciphered, paved the way for a public perception of a court not merely extravagant, but fundamentally corrupt, depraved, and antithetical to a just society. The rumors, whispered through coffee houses and clandestine pamphlets, exaggerated or not, of hidden pleasures and perverse rituals within the palace's walls, filtered down to the common people, fueling their burning resentment and solidifying the image of a ruling class lost to vice, oblivious to the suffering it caused. Financially, the cost of maintaining the court's insatiable lifestyle, including its increasingly elaborate clandestine entertainments and generous pensions for favorites and their offspring, was astronomical. The royal treasury, already strained by costly foreign wars and an inefficient taxation system, was continuously bled dry by the insatiable appetites of the king and his inner circle. While official budgets were colossal, unofficial expenditures for maintaining mistresses and their families, hosting secret parties for days, and bribing complicit officials were often just as ruinous, contributing significantly to France's spiraling national debt. The pursuit of fleeting, often squalid pleasures at Versailles stood in stark, almost unbearable contrast to the widespread poverty, famine, and hunger gnawing at the very heart of the nation, an irony so profound that it would not and could not go unpunished. Socially, the institutionalization of sexual transgression within the court had a devastating long-term impact on the nobility itself, shattering the very foundations of their power and identity. Traditional bonds of family honor and lineage, once paramount, were fatally weakened by rampant infidelity, public knowledge of countless illegitimate children permeating the highest ranks, and casual disregard for marital vows. Marriages became mere cynical political alliances, often devoid of genuine affection, with both partners openly seeking solace, pleasure, and personal advancement elsewhere. This corrosive cynicism, endorsed from the very top, filtered down through society, breeding a pervasive moral relativism where personal gain, immediate gratification, and the pursuit of sensation superseded any lingering sense of duty or higher moral purpose. The concept of aristocratic virtue, once a cornerstone of the Ancien Régime, had become an object of ridicule. The psychological toll on individuals caught within this morally inverted system was immense, a labyrinth of unspoken anxieties and public masquerades. While some, particularly the most cynical or ambitious, reveled in their newfound freedom, many others were broken by the relentless demands of the court's intricate power games and its insatiable pursuit of novelty. Women, especially, found their bodies, reputations, and futures callously exploited for political advancement or the fleeting amusement of a monarch. Men, too, were forced to compromise their integrity, witnessing and participating in acts that shamed them in private moments, even as they publicly feigned indifference. The constant pressure to perform, entertain, remain in favor, and navigate the treacherous currents of courtly intrigue created an atmosphere of profound anxiety, paranoia, and existential dread, where one misstep could mean social ruin, imprisonment, or even death, and where genuine trust was a luxury few could afford. The legacy of the orgy courts of Versailles, therefore, is not merely a tale of historical scandal, but a chilling, profound case study in the self-destructive nature of unchecked power and systemic moral decay. The opulent walls of Versailles, though silent now, still whisper of a time when the pursuit of pleasure became a political instrument wielded with ruthless efficiency, when sacred bonds of matrimony and honor were profaned for amusement, and when a kingdom's very soul was slowly devoured by the very appetites it nurtured in its ruling class. The fall of the Bastille and the subsequent torrent of the French Revolution was not just a political upheaval. It was a furious, bloody reckoning for centuries of aristocratic indulgence, a violent purging of the moral filth that had accumulated behind the glittering facade of absolute monarchy. The ghosts of those forgotten debaucheries remain, etched into the cultural memory of France, a stark and timeless reminder that even the most magnificent empires can crumble and indeed collapse when their foundations are built on nothing but fleeting desires, profound ethical blindness, and a callous disregard for human dignity. The revolution, when it finally erupted, was not merely a political upheaval. It was a visceral, furious rejection of everything Versailles had come to symbolize. The whispers of debauchery that once echoed through its gilded halls were now amplified into a roar of public outrage. The perceived moral corruption of the monarchy and the aristocracy became a foundational grievance, fueling the revolutionary fervor with a righteous indignation against the systematic excess and exploitation that had defined the old regime. The details of the court's libertine practices, once confined to veiled gossip among the elite, were now exposed and exaggerated in a torrent of incendiary pamphlets and revolutionary propaganda. Marie Antoinette, already a target of immense public hatred due to her perceived foreignness and lavish spending, became the personification of aristocratic depravity, unfairly accused of almost every imaginable sexual transgression. These portrayals, however distorted, resonated deeply with a populace that genuinely believed their rulers had descended into a cesspool of vice, while they themselves starved. The storming of the Bastille, and later the forced removal of the royal family from Versailles to Paris, marked the symbolic end of the orgy courts. The palace, once the vibrant, albeit morally decayed heart of French power, was abandoned. Its elaborate mechanisms of social control and hedonistic indulgence ground to a halt. The courtiers, who had once competed for favor through illicit means, now fled for their lives, their powdered wigs and silken robes replaced by the rough garments of disguise. The subsequent reign of terror was a brutal, bloody purging of the old order, and with it, the pervasive immorality associated with the monarchy. Those who had once reveled in the clandestine pleasures of Versailles now faced the guillotine, their former excesses cited as proof of their inherent corruption and unsuitability to live in the new, virtuous republic. The revolution sought to cleanse France, not just politically, but morally, eradicating the very memory of the depravity that had characterized the Ancien Régime. Yet, the legacy of Versailles' hidden courts proved difficult to erase entirely. The cultural impact of its decades of sanctioned debauchery left an indelible mark on French society, contributing to a certain cynicism about institutions and authority that persisted for generations. While the physical structures of the orgy courts were dismantled, the psychological scars of that era remained, influencing subsequent artistic, literary, and political movements. In the aftermath, historians and moralists grappled with the task of understanding how a civilization of such cultural refinement could have fostered such profound moral decay. The narrative often shifted between condemnation and a morbid fascination, reflecting humanity's enduring struggle to reconcile grandeur with depravity. Versailles, though stripped of its former inhabitants and their scandalous secrets, continued to stand as a stark, silent monument to the seductive dangers of absolute power when divorced from responsibility and tempered by no moral constraints. Ultimately, the French Revolution served as a catastrophic, yet arguably necessary, reckoning for the orgy courts of Versailles. It demonstrated that a society that prioritizes unchecked pleasure and privilege over the fundamental well-being and moral integrity of its people is ultimately unsustainable. The echoes of those decadent nights, though muted by centuries, continue to whisper a cautionary tale about the fragility of civilization and the eternal price of excess. The opulent halls of Versailles, once symbols of unrivaled power and sophistication, ultimately became a gilded prison for the souls of those who reveled in its sanctioned depravity. The whispers of its hidden chambers and the ghost of its systematic corruption offer a chilling historical echo, reminding us that even the most glittering of civilizations can rot from within when moral boundaries become mere suggestions. As we close this chapter on the dark heart of French nobility, we're left to ponder the fragility of virtue in the face of absolute indulgence. Thank you for daring to delve into these forbidden histories with me.